The first time I realized I was living the wrong life, I didn't feel panic. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones and stays there. I was sitting in my car outside my apartment building, engine still running, watching the lights in other people's windows turn on and off. Somewhere inside those rooms, people were laughing, arguing, cooking, loving, living. And I felt like a visitor in my own life. I didn't go inside right away. I just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to remember when my life started feeling like a place I didn't belong to. There was no single moment. No dramatic mistake. No big betrayal. Just a long series of small choices that slowly led me away from myself. People think regret comes from bad decisions. But sometimes it comes from the safe ones. I had chosen stability. Comfort. Predictability. I had chosen to stay. Years earlier, I had been someone else. Not happier. Just more honest. I used to take risks. I used to say what I felt. I used to walk away from things that didn't feel right. Then life taught me to be careful. Careful with emotions. Careful with people. Careful with dreams. So I built a life that made sense on paper. A steady job. A long-term relationship. A quiet routine. From the outside, it looked peaceful. From the inside, it felt like I was slowly disappearing. My partner wasn't cruel. They weren't distant. They weren't wrong. They were simply incompatible with the person I used to be. We talked about schedules, bills, plans. We didn't talk about fears, doubts, or dreams. Our conversations were practical. Efficient. Empty. Every night, we sat on the same couch, watching shows neither of us cared about, filling the silence with noise so we wouldn't have to hear what wasn't being said. I told myself this was adulthood. Mature. Stable. Normal. But normal felt like numbness. The feeling that finally broke something inside me didn't come from a fight. It came from a stranger. One evening, after work, I stopped by a small bookstore I'd never noticed before. It was hidden between two loud cafes, its entrance quiet and dim like it was trying not to be seen. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and dust. The kind of smell that makes you feel like time moves slower. A woman stood behind the counter, reading. She looked up when I approached. "Looking for anything specific?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just looking." She smiled like she understood more than I had said. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers over spines, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity. When I reached the counter, I placed a random book down, not even caring what it was. She scanned it, then looked at me. "You look like someone who used to dream," she said casually. The words hit harder than any insult ever could. "I still do," I replied, too quickly. She raised an eyebrow. "Then you should probably stop standing still." I left the store without responding, but her words followed me. Not because they were rude. Because they were accurate. That night, lying beside someone who felt more like a roommate than a partner, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. When did I stop choosing myself? The answer was uncomfortable. I had stayed when I should have left. I stayed in a job that drained me. I stayed in a relationship that silenced me. I stayed in a version of myself that felt smaller every day. Not because I was trapped. Because leaving felt risky. And risk felt exhausting. The next weeks felt heavier than usual. Every routine felt louder. Every silence felt longer. I started noticing how little space my life had for who I really was. My thoughts had nowhere to go. My emotions had nowhere to land. Everything felt contained. Controlled. Safe. And painfully empty. One evening, My partner asked me, "Are you happy?" The question sounded harmless. It wasn't he. I opened my mouth to say yes. The word never came out. Instead, I said, "I don't know." The silence that followed was thick. They nodded slowly. "Me neither," they admitted. That should have led to a conversation. It didn't. We went back to watching the screen. Two people quietly admitting dissatisfaction without changing anything. That was our pattern. Acknowledgement without action. Staying without living. A few days later, I returned to the bookstore. The woman wasn't there. But the feeling was. I stood in the middle of the shop, surrounded by stories I would never live, and felt something close to grief. Not for lost love. Not for missed opportunities. For the version of myself that had slowly disappeared without a farewell. That night, I went for a walk without telling anyone. No destination. No music. Just the sound of my footsteps and my own thoughts. I walked until the city felt unfamiliar. That's when I realized something terrifying. I felt more alive walking alone in the dark than I did in my own home. The realization didn't feel dramatic. It felt honest. I had built a life that looked correct. But it didn't feel right. The difference between those two things is where regret is born. I started writing in a notebook. Not plans. Not goals. Confessions. About the things I didn't say. The dreams I postponed. The parts of myself I had silenced to keep the peace. The pages filled quickly. So did my chest. The more honest I became on paper, the harder it was to stay quiet in real life. One night, my partner noticed the notebook. "What's that?" they asked. "Something I should be started years ago," I replied. They didn't ask more. And that was the problem. We had stopped being curious about each other. Curiosity is the first thing to die when comfort takes over. Days passed. Then weeks. The tension inside me grew, not like anger, but like pressure. I wasn't furious. I was suffocating. And the scariest part was realizing I had built the walls myself. One evening, while standing in the kitchen, listening to the familiar silence between us, I finally said what I had been afraid to say. "I don't think this life fits me anymore." My partner didn't shout. They didn't cry. They just looked tired. "I was wondering when you'd say it," they replied. That hurt more than resistance ever could. Because it meant they had felt the same way. We talked for hours. Not angrily. Honestly. About the people we used to be. The people we became. The gap between them. By the end of the night, nothing was resolved. But something had changed. I couldn't pretend anymore. Staying had become more painful than leaving. Yet I stayed. Not because I was unsure. Because leaving meant destroying something familiar. And familiarity feels safer than truth. Months went by. Nothing changed. But I did. I grew quieter. More distant. Less present. Not out of spite. Out of resignation. I had become a guest in my own life. Then, one morning, I woke up and felt nothing. No sadness. No frustration. No hope. Just emptiness. And that terrified me more than any emotional pain ever had. Feeling bad means you still care. Feeling nothing means you've given up. That was the moment I understood something essential. Staying was killing parts of me. Not loudly. Not visibly. Quietly. And I was helping it happen. I packed a small bag. Not everything. Just enough to leave. My partner watched silently. "Are you running away?" they asked. "No," I said. "I'm finally going somewhere." They nodded. No drama. Just acceptance. Sometimes, the end of something doesn't feel like a storm. It feels like relief. I didn't go far. I didn't start a new life. I didn't become someone extraordinary. I just chose myself for the first time in years. The silence in my new apartment felt different. Not heavy. Open. Some nights, I still feel the weight of the life I left behind. Not because I miss it. Because it reminds me how long I ignored myself. Regret doesn't always come from leaving. Sometimes, it comes from staying too long. And learning that lesson costs more than walking away ever will.